Most of your problems are not caused by the world. They are caused by the silent agreements you made with your own weakness. The strange part is that you rarely notice when it happens. It happens quietly in ordinary moments. When someone speaks harshly and you carry their words for days, when a small failure convinces you that you are not capable, when the opinions of strangers begin to shape the direction of your life, little by little, your peace is traded away. You believe your struggles are complex, mysterious, unsolvable. Yet if you were forced to sit in complete silence and examine them honestly, you would discover something uncomfortable. Most of them come from the same place, not from fate, not from bad luck, not from other people, from the simple fact that you have not yet learned how to govern yourself. The Stoics understood this long ago. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in the quiet hours of the night, was not trying to impress anyone. He was reminding himself of a truth, that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control what you become because of it. And that single distinction quietly solves most of the chaos in a human life. Imagine for a moment that you were stripped of all distractions. No noise, no endless scrolling, no outside voices telling you how to think or feel. Just you and your thoughts, sitting with the raw material of your character. Many people fear this silence, not because silence is dangerous, but because silence reveals things. It reveals how easily you are offended, how quickly your mood depends on the behavior of others, how often you abandon your own principles just to avoid discomfort. The Stoics never tried to escape these observations. They leaned toward them. They examined them with patience, the way a craftsman studies the flaws in his own work. Because the purpose was never perfection. The purpose was mastery. And mastery begins with honesty. The first lesson that quietly eliminates many of life's unnecessary struggles is this: most of the things that disturb you are not events. They are interpretations. A stranger ignores you and you interpret it as disrespect. A colleague succeeds and you interpret it as a threat. A small setback occurs and you interpret it as failure. But the event itself carries no meaning. Meaning is something the mind attaches afterward. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that if an external thing causes you distress, the pain you is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this estimate, he wrote, you have the power to revoke at any moment. Think about that carefully. If your interpretation can be changed, then your suffering is not as permanent as it feels. This is not a trick of positive thinking. It is a discipline of perception. You begin to notice the space between what happens and how you respond. And inside that space, a new kind of freedom quietly appears. But this freedom demands responsibility. It requires you to stop blaming the world for the storms inside your own mind. Many people resist this idea. They prefer the comfort of believing that their peace depends on the behavior of others. That way they never have to confront the harder truth. Peace is an internal skill, and like any skill, it must be practiced. Another lesson that solves more problems than most people realize is the understanding that comfort is a poor teacher. Human beings naturally seek ease. You design our lives around avoiding difficulty. Yet every time we escape discomfort, we also escape growth. The Stoics trained themselves to welcome small hardships deliberately, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they understood something about human nature. A person who never practices hardship becomes fragile. A fragile mind breaks easily under pressure, and pressure is guaranteed in life. You cannot negotiate with it. You cannot avoid it forever. What you can do is prepare. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire during war, plague, and political chaos. Yet in his private writings he rarely complained about circumstances. Instead, he returned again and again to the same quiet question: what kind of person will I choose to be today? Not tomorrow, not when conditions improve. Today. This question eliminates many excuses. You may not control your environment, but you always control the quality of your character within it. And character is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in the quiet choices no one sees. When you decide to remain calm instead of reacting. When you choose discipline instead of distraction. When you do what is right even when it brings no recognition. These decisions appear small, yet over time they construct the architecture of a life. Another brutally honest lesson is that most people spend far too much energy trying to control how they appear. They curate their image, measure their worth through approval, and constantly adjust their behavior to fit expectations. But this creates a strange form of slavery, because when your identity depends on the opinions of others, your peace becomes permanently unstable. One moment you are praised and feel confident. The next moment someone criticizes you and your entire sense of self collapses. The Stoics saw this instability clearly. They asked a simple question: why should the judgment of someone who does not understand your values determine your peace? It makes no sense. Yet millions of people live exactly this way. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the approval of others is both temporary and unreliable. The same crowd that celebrates you today may condemn you tomorrow. So why build your life on such unstable ground? Instead, the Stoic path suggests something more demanding but infinitely more stable. Build your self-respect internally. Measure your life by whether your actions align with reason, integrity, and purpose. This standard cannot be taken from you by criticism or you praise. It belongs entirely to you. And once you begin to live by this internal measure, a remarkable thing happens. Your energy returns. Energy that was once wasted worrying about reputation becomes available for something far more valuable: self-mastery. But perhaps the most uncomfortable Stoic lesson is the realization that time is the most precious resource you possess, yet it is the one people waste most carelessly. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the shortness of life, not to create fear, but to sharpen awareness. Every day that passes removes one page from the book of your life, and once that page is gone, it cannot be rewritten. Yet many people live as if their time is unlimited. They postpone meaningful action. They delay difficult decisions. They wait for the perfect moment that never arrives. Meanwhile, years quietly disappear. The Stoic approach is brutally simple. Do not wait to live with intention. Begin now, not dramatically, not with grand declarations, but with quiet clarity. Examine how you spend your days. Examine what occupies your attention. Examine whether your habits move you closer to the person you wish to become. Because whether you notice it or not, your daily actions are writing the story of your life, and the story is being written right now. There is a moment that comes to every person who begins to examine their life honestly. At first, the discoveries feel small. You notice a few habits that waste your time, a few reactions that disturb your peace, a few thoughts that quietly undermine your confidence. But if you continue the examination long enough, something deeper begins to reveal itself. You begin to see patterns, not occasional mistakes but repeated behaviors, not random frustration but predictable emotional cycles, the same worries appearing in different situations, the same disappointments returning under new disguises. It is at this point that most people stop looking, because patterns imply responsibility. Responsibility demands change. Marcus Aurelius understood this discomfort well. When he wrote to himself, he was not trying to sound wise. He was confronting his own mind with questions that were often inconvenient. Why do you keep reacting to things that do not matter? Why do you waste energy on people who do not control your character? Why do you allow small disturbances to dictate the tone of your entire day? These questions are simple, but simplicity does not make them easy. The mind resists them because it prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar discipline. Consider how often your mood depends on circumstances outside your control, a message that does not arrive when expected, a comment that feels dismissive, a plan that falls apart. None of these events are catastrophic, yet they can quietly influence your entire emotional landscape for hours, sometimes days. The Stoics observed this carefully. They noticed that most people hand over their inner stability far too easily. A stranger's opinion can disturb them. A minor inconvenience can irritate them. A small disappointment can discourage them. And each time this happens, they lose something valuable, their authority over themselves. The Stoic discipline begins with reclaiming that authority. It begins with a simple but difficult realization. Your reactions are habits. Habits of thought, habits of interpretation, habits of emotional response. And like all habits, they were built through repetition, which means can also be rebuilt through repetition. But rebuilding the mind requires patience. You cannot command your thoughts to change overnight. The mind does not obey force. It responds to training. Marcus Aurelius often practiced what we might call mental distancing. When something irritated him, he would pause and ask a quiet question. What is actually happening here? Not what it feels like. Not what it appears to be. What is the reality of the situation? Very often the reality is far smaller than the emotional reaction suggests. Someone disagreed with you. Something took longer than expected. A plan changed, that is all. But the mind, when left untrained, adds unnecessary drama. It begins constructing stories around the event. It imagines disrespect where none was intended. It predicts future problems that may never arrive. Soon the mind is fighting battles that exist only in imagination. The Stoics recognize this tendency as one of the greatest sources of human suffering. Not events, themselves, but the stories we attach to them. This leads to another brutally honest lesson. Your mind will generate problems even when none exist. If you are not careful, it will replay old regrets. It will invent future fears. It will compare your life to others and manufacture dissatisfaction where there was once contentment. In other words, the mind can become its own source of chaos. Marcus Aurelius never tried to eliminate thought. That would be impossible. Instead, he practiced governing which thoughts deserved attention. He treated his attention as a valuable resource. And this is a lesson that quietly resolves many problems in modern life. Where you place your attention determines the quality of your experience. If your attention constantly searches for insult, you will find insult everywhere. If it searches for unfairness, the world will appear deeply unjust. If it searches for comparison, someone will always seem ahead of you. But attention can also be directed elsewhere. Toward effort, toward improvement, toward gratitude for the present moment. This shift may sound small, but its consequences are profound. Because attention shapes perception, and perception shapes emotion. Another difficult Stoic realization is that many people confuse activity with progress. They fill their days with tasks, conversations, notifications, and obligations. At the end of the day, they feel exhausted yet strangely unsatisfied. Why? Because movement is not the same as direction. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself not to be distracted by what he called busy trivialities. The world constantly invites you into noise, news that provokes outrage, conversations that drain energy, endless streams of information that demand attention but provide little wisdom. If you are not careful, these distractions will quietly consume the most focused hours of your life, and years later you may look back and wonder why your deeper ambitions remained unfinished. The Stoic answer is not to reject the world, but to become selective about what deserves your attention. Focus is an act of discipline. Each time you say yes to something unimportant, you are saying no to something meaningful, and often you do not realize what was sacrificed until much later. Another lesson, one that many people resist, is that emotional resilience is built through voluntary restraint. Most people believe that freedom means expressing every impulse, every irritation, every opinion. The Stoics, saw this differently. To them, freedom meant the ability to choose your response deliberately, not reacting immediately, not allowing every emotion to dictate action. Instead, creating a small space between feeling and behavior. Inside that space lives wisdom. Imagine how many conflicts would disappear if people practiced this single discipline. How many arguments begin not because of serious disagreement, but because two people react too quickly. A careless remark becomes an insult. An insult, becomes anger. Anger becomes retaliation. And suddenly a small moment grows into lasting resentment. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that other people act from ignorance, fear, or misunderstanding. When you recognize this, anger begins to lose its force, because anger assumes intention. But most human mistakes are not malicious. They are simply thoughtless. Recognizing this does not mean accepting poor behavior. It means responding with clarity rather than emotion. Clarity is always more powerful than reaction. Another Stoic lesson that solves a surprising number of problems is the practice of lowering unnecessary expectations. Many frustrations arise not from reality, but from the gap between reality and expectation. You expect people to behave perfectly. You expect plans to unfold smoothly. You expect progress to happen quickly. When reality fails to meet these expectations, disappointment appears. But the Stoics recommended something radical. Expect difficulty. Expect misunderstanding. Expect obstacles. Not with pessimism, but with preparation. If you anticipate challenges, they lose their ability to shock you. Instead of reacting with frustration, you simply adapt. Marcus Aurelius often described obstacles as material for character. Just as a fire grows stronger when fed with fuel, a disciplined mind grows stronger when facing resistance. The obstacle becomes part of the training. And when you begin to see difficulties this way, Your relationship with problems changes completely. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin asking a better question. What does this situation require from me? Patience, courage, self-control, clarity. Every challenge becomes an invitation to practice one of these qualities. In this way, life itself becomes a training ground for character. But this transformation requires honesty, brutal honesty, because the mind will always try to protect its familiar weaknesses. It will justify procrastination. It will defend unnecessary anger. It will rationalize wasted time. Only through honest reflection can these patterns be exposed. Marcus Aurelius practiced this reflection constantly, not to criticize himself, but to refine himself. He understood that the greatest empire a person can rule is not territory, but the self. And this empire is governed not through force, but through awareness. At some point in a person's life, there comes a quiet realization that changes the way they see the world. Not you. Suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly through observation. You begin to notice that many of the struggles people carry are not created by circumstances, but by something far more subtle: ego. Not the loud arrogance that is easy to recognize, but the quieter form that hides beneath ordinary thoughts. The need to be right, the need to be respected, the need to be seen as important, the need to control how others perceive you. Marcus Aurelius watched this tendency carefully within himself. You understood that ego is not always aggressive. Often it is fragile. It wants reassurance. It wants recognition. It wants the world to confirm its value, but the world rarely cooperates. And so the ego becomes restless. A comment feels like an insult. Silence feels like rejection. Another person's success feels like a personal defeat. When you look honestly, you will see how many conflicts begin here. Not with genuine harm, but with wounded pride. Two people defending their image. Two mind you, unwilling to release the desire to appear superior. And suddenly a simple disagreement becomes a lasting division. The Stoics treated ego not as an enemy to destroy, but as a force to understand. Because ego is rooted in a natural human instinct, the desire to matter. The problem arises when this desire begins to dominate reason, when the mind becomes more concerned with appearing strong than actually becoming strong. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that reputation is something that exists only in the minds of others. It is fragile, temporary, and largely outside your control. You may act with integrity for years, yet a single rumor can distort your image in the eyes of someone who barely knows you. Does that mean your character has changed? Of course not. It only means perception has shifted. This realization is liberating if you allow it to be, because it reveals a truth that many people spend their lives resisting. You cannot control how others see you, but you control who you actually are. The Stoic path asks you to invest your energy in the second. Another lesson that quietly dissolves many problems is the discipline of patience. Modern life moves quickly. Information arrives instantly. Messages are answered within seconds. Solutions are expected immediately. But character does not grow at this speed. Wisdom is slow. Strength is slow. Understanding is slow. Marcus Aurelius knew this well. Every day he faced decisions that affected thousands of people. Yet his writings reveal a mind that refused to rush toward reaction. He paused. He reflected. He allowed time for reason to settle before action followed. This is not weakness. It is mastery. Consider how many mistakes occur because people feel pressure to respond immediately. A heated reply sent without thought. A decision made in frustration. A judgment formed without full understanding. These actions feel satisfying in the moment, but they often create consequences that last much longer than the emotion that produced them. The Stoics practiced a different rhythm. They allowed emotion to arrive, but they did not allow emotion to command. Instead, they asked a question that few people remember to ask. Is this reaction worthy of the person I am trying to become? This question slows the mind. It creates a moment of reflection between impulse and action. And within that moment, wisdom has space to speak. Another brutally honest Stoic lesson is that control is far more limited than most people believe. Much of human anxiety comes from trying to manage things that were never ours to manage. The behavior of other people, the outcome of every effort, the unfolding of future events, the opinions that circulate beyond our reach. The mind clings to these things because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. So it begins planning, predicting, worrying. Yet despite all this effort, reality continues to unfold in ways we cannot fully predict. Marcus Aurelius returned often to the idea that the universe operates according to causes far larger than any individual plan. To resist this truth is to create endless frustration, but to accept it is to gain something rare, calm. This calm does not come from indifference. It comes from clarity. You recognize that your responsibility lies only in your actions, not in the final outcome. You prepare carefully. You act with integrity. You give full effort. Then you release the result. This release is not resignation. It is trust in you, the process of life. When you stop trying to control everything, your energy becomes more focused. Instead of worrying about what might happen, you concentrate on what can be done now. This shift alone removes a surprising amount of mental noise. Another lesson the Stoics understood deeply is that comparison is one of the fastest ways to destroy peace. In every era, people have looked at the achievements of others and felt inadequate, but in the modern world this tendency has become constant. You see the highlights of countless lives. Success displayed without struggle, confidence displayed without doubt, achievement displayed without years of unseen effort, and the mind, without realizing it, begins to measure itself against these fragments. Marcus Aurelius warned himself against this habit. He reminded himself that every person walks a path shaped by circumstances, opportunities and challenges that are invisible to outsiders. To compare lives without understanding the differences is meaningless. The Stoic alternative is simple but demanding. Compare yourself only to your previous self. Ask whether your character today is stronger than it was yesterday. Ask whether your discipline has improved. Ask whether your reactions are becoming calmer, your judgment clearer. These are the comparisons that matter, because they lead to growth rather than envy. Another powerful Stoic insight is that the mind becomes what it repeatedly contemplates. If you dwell constantly on resentment, resentment becomes familiar. If you dwell on fear, fear becomes stronger. But if you dwell on courage, patience, and understanding, those qualities begin to shape your character. Marcus Aurelius treated his mind almost like a garden. He understood that thoughts are seeds. Left unattended, weeds grow naturally, but with careful attention, stronger plants can take root. The discipline here is subtle. You do not deny negative thoughts when they appear. That would be unrealistic. Instead, you refuse to let them dominate the landscape of your mind. You acknowledge them, examine them, and then redirect your attention towards something constructive. Over time, this practice changes the atmosphere of your inner life. Calm becomes more natural. Clarity becomes easier. Resilience becomes stronger. But perhaps one of the most difficult Stoic lessons is learning to accept that not everyone will understand your path. When you begin focusing on discipline, self-control, and inner stability, some people may find your behavior unusual. They may interpret your calm as distance, your restraint as weakness, your independence as arrogance. Marcus Aurelius experienced this often. Power attracts criticism, misunderstanding, and suspicion. Yet he reminded himself repeatedly that the opinions of others cannot determine the truth of your character. If your actions are guided by reason and integrity, misunderstanding becomes less troubling. Not everyone is meant to see the same path. And that is acceptable, because the Stoic life is not a performance. It is a quiet commitment. A commitment to govern the mind, to refine character, to act with clarity even when the world around you becomes noisy. This commitment is not built in a single moment. It is built gradually, through daily effort, through countless small decisions, through patience with yourself when progress feels slow, through persistence when discipline becomes uncomfortable. There is a point in life when a person can no longer pretend that the world will arrange itself according to their preferences. This realization rarely arrives in comfort. It often appears during moments of disappointment, uncertainty, or quiet exhaustion. You begin to see that many of the expectations you once carried were never realistic. People will misunderstand you. Plans will fail. Effort will sometimes go unnoticed. And life will continue moving forward without asking whether you feel ready. For many people, this realization creates bitterness. They feel as if life has betrayed them. But the Stoics saw this moment differently. To them, it was the beginning of maturity. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the universe does not exist to satisfy individual desires. It follows its own order, its own rhythm, its own unfolding. Once you understand this, something inside you shifts. You stop demanding that reality be different. Instead, you begin asking a more powerful question. How will I respond to the reality that exists? This question places responsibility exactly where it belongs. within you. Responsibility is not always comfortable. In fact, it often feels heavy at first. When you accept responsibility for your reactions, your discipline, and your choices, you can no longer blame circumstances for the condition of your character. Yet this same responsibility brings strength. Because if your peace depends on external conditions, you will always remain vulnerable. But if your peace, you choose to meet those conditions, you begin to develop something far more stable: inner authority. The Stoics believe that suffering becomes destructive only when it is resisted without understanding. Pain itself is part of the human experience. Loss, uncertainty, fatigue, disappointment, these are unavoidable. But the mind often adds an additional layer of suffering by insisting that these experiences should not exist. It argues with reality, and this argument is unwinnable. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this with remarkable calm. He understood that life contains both beauty and hardship, often intertwined in ways that cannot be separated. The Stoic approach was not to eliminate difficulty, but to meet it with dignity. When hardship arrives, the question is not whether you like it. The question is what kind of person you will become because of it. This perspective transforms the meaning of adversity. Instead of seeing obstacles as interruptions to life, you begin to see them as part of life's training. A moment of failure becomes a lesson in humility. A period of uncertainty becomes a lesson in patience. A confrontation becomes a lesson in restraint. In this way, difficulty becomes material for character. This transformation requires honesty, the kind of honesty that most people avoid. It requires admitting when your own habits contribute to your struggles. Many problems persist not because they are complex, but because people refuse to change the patterns that create them. They continue reacting the same way, thinking the same thoughts, repeating the same mistakes, and then they wonder why nothing improves. Marcus Aurelius was relentless with himself on this point. He believed that self-examination was essential to growth. Each evening he would reflect quietly on his actions. Where did I act with wisdom? Where did I allow irritation to guide me? Where could I have been more patient? This was not self-criticism. It was self-correction. Just as a craftsman studies his work to improve his skill, the Stoic studies his behavior to refine his character. Another important lesson emerges when you begin practicing this reflection. You realize that progress is rarely dramatic, it is gradual. At first you may still feel the same emotions: frustration, impatience, doubt, but something subtle begins to change. The emotions pass more quickly. You react less intensely. You recover your calm more easily. This is the quiet growth of resilience. Resilience is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to remain steady within difficulty. And steadiness is built through repetition. Each time you face a challenge without losing your principles, your character strengthens. Each time you remain patient when irritation tries to take control, your discipline deepens. Each time you choose understanding instead of anger, your mind becomes clearer. Over time, these small victories accumulate. But there is another Stoic truth that many people find uncomfortable. Not everyone wants to grow. Some people prefer familiar habits, even when those habits create suffering. They resist discipline because discipline feels restrictive. They avoid reflection because reflection reveals responsibility. They choose distraction instead of self-examination. Marcus Aurelius observed this tendency around him constantly, yet he refused to allow it to influence his own path. He reminded himself that every person must decide how they will live. You cannot force wisdom upon someone who does not seek it. But you can cultivate wisdom within yourself, and when you do, something interesting happens. Your presence begins to influence others quietly, not through lectures or arguments, but through example. Calm becomes noticeable in a chaotic environment. Discipline becomes noticeable in a distracted world. Integrity becomes noticeable in a culture that often rewards convenience. People may not always understand your choices, but they will feel the difference. This is one of the most powerful forms of influence. Another Stoic insight that solves many problems is learning to detach from unnecessary emotional noise. Every day, the mind encounters countless small disturbances. A careless remark, a minor inconvenience, a delay, a disagreement. Most of these events are insignificant, yet they consume enormous emotional energy because people react to each one as if it were important. Marcus Aurelius practiced what might be called selective seriousness. He reminded himself not to treat every irritation as a crisis. When you pause and examine most daily frustrations, you will notice something. In a week, they will not matter. In a month, they will be forgotten. In a year, they will seem almost invisible. So why allow them to dominate your peace now? The Stoic answer is to reserve your emotional energy for what truly matters. Your character, your actions, your responsibilities, your relationships. Everything else deserves less attention than the mind naturally wants to give it. This discipline creates a surprising sense of calm. The world still moves with the same unpredictability, but you are no longer pulled in every direction by its movement. You become more centered, more deliberate, more stable, and stability is a rare strength. There is a quiet moment that arrives when a person has spent enough time examining life honestly. It is not a moment of excitement. It is not dramatic, but it carries a certain stillness, a kind of clarity. You begin to see that most of the problems that once consumed your mind were never as powerful as they appeared. They were magnified by impatience, by ego, by fear, by the constant habit of looking outside yourself for control. And once you understand this, the world begins to look different. The same events still occur. People still misunderstand you. Plans still fail. Uncertainty still appears without warning. But the difference is no longer in the events. The difference is in you. Marcus Aurelius often returned to a simple reminder that he wrote again and again in his private reflections. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. At first, this statement may seem obvious, but its meaning becomes deeper the longer you live with it, because it reveals that inner freedom does not come from controlling the world. It comes from mastering your response to it, and when you truly begin practicing this, discipline, something remarkable begins to happen. The noise of unnecessary problems starts to fade. Many conflicts disappear because you no longer react impulsively. Many worries disappear because you stop trying to control outcomes that are not yours to control. Many frustrations disappear because your expectations become aligned with reality. Little by little, the mind becomes quieter, more deliberate, more focused. But this quiet strength is not built through theory. It is built through practice. Through daily moments where you choose discipline instead of impulse, patience instead of irritation, understanding instead of judgment, responsibility instead of blame. These choices often feel small in the moment, yet they shape the direction of your life. Because character is nothing more than the accumulation of repeated decisions. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He knew that greatness was not found in dramatic gestures or public recognition. Greatness was found in the quiet ability to remain steady. Steady when others panic. Steady when circumstances change. Steady when the future feels uncertain. This steadiness is what the Stoics truly pursued. Not perfection, not invulnerability, but a mind that remains clear even when life becomes complicated. And perhaps one of the most powerful realizations comes when you finally understand that the purpose of these lessons is not to remove difficulty from life. Difficulty will always exist. The purpose is to transform. You meet it. When challenges arrive, they no longer feel like personal attacks. They become opportunities to practice strength. When people behave poorly, you no longer feel the need to mirror their behavior. You remain guided by your own principles. When uncertainty appears, you stop trying to eliminate it completely. Instead, you focus on acting well within the present moment. This mindset creates a form of independence that few people ever experience. Not independence from society, but independence from unnecessary emotional turmoil. And with this independence comes clarity about something many people overlook. Life is not measured by comfort. It is measured by character. The moments that shape you most are rarely the easiest ones. They are the moments where you are forced to decide who you will be. Will you react or remain composed? Will you blame or accept responsibility? Will you retreat into distraction or face reality with courage? Each decision strengthens one version of yourself while weakening another. Marcus Aurelius often imagined life as a series of tests designed not to punish, but to reveal. To reveal what kind of person you are becoming. And once you begin to see life this way, something interesting happens. Even ordinary moments become meaningful. A difficult conversation becomes a test of patience. A long day becomes a test of discipline. A moment of anger becomes a test of self-control. Life itself becomes the training ground. And the goal, simple, to leave each situation with your character intact, perhaps even stronger. This is why the Stoics believed that peace is not found in perfect circumstances. It is found in a trained mind. A mind that understands what matters and what does not. A mind that refuses to be disturbed by trivialities. A mind that focuses its energy on what is within its control. If you truly practice these lessons, you may discover something surprising. Your problems do not disappear entirely. But most of them, lose their power over you. The anger that once lasted hours fades in minutes. The worries that once consumed your thoughts lose their urgency. The opinions that once shaped your self-worth become less important. And slowly, quietly, you begin to live with a kind of calm confidence. Not because life has become easy, but because you have become stronger. Stronger in judgment, stronger in patience, stronger in discipline. This is the quiet promise of Stoic philosophy. Not that life will be free of you, struggle, but that you will become capable of meeting struggle with dignity. And when a person reaches this point, something deeper begins to grow, purpose. Not the loud, ambitious idea of purpose that seeks constant achievement, but the quieter form, the purpose of becoming someone whose presence brings stability into a chaotic world, someone who responds thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively, someone who carries responsibility without resentment, someone who understands that the most important victories happen within. And if these ideas resonate with you, if even one of these lessons caused you to pause and reflect, then you are already walking the path that the Stoics believed was worth pursuing, because the journey towards self-mastery does not begin with perfection, it begins with awareness. And awareness grows stronger every time you choose reflection over distraction. If you wish to continue exploring this path, you are always welcome here. This channel, built by you, Stoicism, exists for one simple reason: to help you strengthen the one thing that can never be taken from you, your character. So if you believe that a calm mind is stronger than a chaotic one, if you believe that discipline builds freedom, and if you believe that true strength begins within, then stay with us on this journey. Subscribe to Built by Stoicism and continue training your mind the way the Stoics once trained theirs, quietly, consistently, one lesson at a time.